Hi, I'm what's left of Ron Bryson. Um, my story starts February 1st, 2017. After much trepidation and hesitation, I suppose, I agreed to make a video. February 1st, 2017, I was on my way to Orlando to a transportation convention. I left. Everything was great. I felt fine that day. Got over around Tallahassee and decided I'd better stop and get gas, and felt okay. Got back on the interstate and I've gone about a mile and I knew something was very wrong. Probably need to mention that years before that I had been trained in a couple of different states as a paramedic. And since I had been, well, there was not much need for me to go to the doctor and have checkups and that sort of thing. Just weren't necessary. I hadn't been to the doctor in too long. So I knew something was very wrong, and I pulled into the median of the interstate actually. Called my wife, and I told her, I think I'm going to come back home. Something's wrong. I don't feel just right. And she says, why don't you go to the hospital in Tallahassee? Call 911 and go to the hospital right there. Oh, no. I think I'll come home. And I said a prayer. And I asked to be able to make it back home and to tell her goodbye. I had never experienced a sensation like that before. Under my seatbelt, my pelvic and abdominal region. It felt like 1,000 hornets were stinging me all at once. I was very shocky, sweating profusely, and I don't remember much about that trip back home at all. I just got in the flow of traffic, and I knew I didn't need to pass anyone on the interstate, and just watch for my exit. Very foolish thing to do. I made it back home, and I was not well. I was even worse then, but tried to convince myself and my wife that, maybe my blood sugar was a little low, and I was sure that if I ate some clam chowder, I think I'd feel much better. That was a mistake. So she gets the neighbor over, and they convince me that I needed to go to the hospital at that point. Called an ambulance, and like I say, I had been trained in a couple of states as a paramedic. I didn't think it was my heart. I didn't think it was a stroke, but I knew something was wrong. The ambulance arrived, they loaded me up, and attached me to the monitor. I'm in the ambulance, and I looked around at the monitor, and I said, I told you there was nothing much wrong with me. That's a normal sinus rhythm. And they said, how do you know about that? And I said, well, that's another conversation. We'll talk about that some other time. I requested to go up to Dothan, Alabama to the hospital, and I don't remember much about that trip either. But when I got to the hospital there was a doctor came and talked to me. They gave me some pain medicine. And he says, Mr. Bryson, you have a very large abdominal aneurysm and it's leaking. And my response was, oh, okay, well, at least I know what got me. He looked at me a little odd, but he came back in a few minutes. I don't know how long it was. He says, we can't help you here. We're going to send you up to UAB in Birmingham, Alabama. And a couple of minutes after that, he comes back and he says, they're on diversion. They can't take you. We'll fly you down to Shands in Gainesville at the university. Comes back. Well, it's too foggy to fly. Can't do that. So we're going to send you down to Panama City, Florida. By the time I got to Panama City and to the trauma room there, from the onset of my symptoms, had been about 12 hours. And they were giving me IVs and blood. The tone was very serious. They get me there, and the only thing I could ask for was a glycerin swab. They didn't have any at the first hospital. They gave me a little bit of ice. And I asked them for a glycerin swab, and they said, oh, yeah, we have that. They gave me one. That was wonderful. At the hospital there, I met the lead surgeon in the team of 3 cardiovascular surgeons that worked on me. Very wonderful woman doctor. And fortunately for me, she is, much like me, very stubborn. During the time of getting me prepared for the operating room, I had the sensation that I was standing up with everyone else talking to them. Of course, I was flat on my back, but I had that sensation. And she described everything, and she says, oh, by the way, this has triggered a DVT that has gone into your right foot, and that's the reason you have that intense pain. So I started a tactics of negotiation with her at the operating room door. I said, I want my cell phone. I need to send a couple of emails and make a phone call. She said, you're not going to do that. We're going in. And I said, well, I'm going to do that before I go into the operating room. I got a couple of people I want to tell goodbye. I thought that was it. So I got my phone, sent that email to the people I worked with and told them that this was probably the end of me, and I made a phone call and told a good friend of mine goodbye. I told the surgeon, I says, you know, that aneurysm, if you can stay away from my renal branch, I'd just as soon not do dialysis. And the DVT, well, if you can't do anything with that, just amputate my leg just below the knee, and if you can save enough for prosthesis, that won't be too bad. Now let me remind you, I don't tolerate opioids very well. Sometimes I tend to be a little blunt anyway, so they aggravate that. She told me at that point, Mr. Bryson, you need to understand that if I cannot fix what's leaking now, you won't be back. Oh, okay. And since she put it that way, I took off my wedding band, gave it to my wife. She put it on her hand, and I told her goodbye. That surgery lasted, they tell me, for 6 or 7 hours. And I woke up in a butterscotch colored room. No windows, seemed like. All of that seemed, from the time I left the interstate median in Tallahassee, it was surreal. There was no time and space element to it. It was just, I was somewhere. I woke up and there was a male nurse in that room, and he had his back to me. And when I was able to speak, I said, "Well, I guess I made it." He turned around and, "Yeah, you made it." Over the next couple of days, my right leg and my foot, they had trouble getting pulses in my foot. My leg was sort of a raspberry color. One thing that I noticed, one remarkable thing, they would come in fairly often wanting to check my incision, and they would say, "How's your pain? 1 to 10. And finally, after a few days of that, I said, you asked me 1 to 10. I've been to 40. So 1 to 10 is too constraining a parameter to put on pain. And since I was not doing very well on opioids, I refused those and dealt with it. At that time, they announced to me on top of the AAA that I had survived so far, and the DVT that had been triggered by that. I had a somewhat large aneurysm in an iliac artery and a popliteal aneurysm behind my knee in my right leg. They assured me they had done what they needed to keep me alive, and the other ones would need to be repaired later on. So I was in intensive care, I suppose, for 11 days. That's what my wife told me. I don't remember much about that. Here again, I would have visitors. They'd come in, and it was like I was standing up talking to them. Of course, I was flat on my back, and it's just my nature sometimes to be somewhat blunt, so they had to get used to me. I encountered some very wonderful, very professional people during that time. That was one of the remarkable things, just the caliber of people that they had in that facility. After the first surgery, I guess I was in the hospital for 17 days. I went home and had physical and occupational therapy and learned how to walk on a DVT. My balance was shot. I was terrified of the shower. Don't know why. And through therapy, I regained some strength and did okay. And after a few weeks, I went back to work. And I work in bridge construction and inspection industry. Done that all my life, really. Went back to work and did what I could. So I had the AAA surgery the first day of February. Easter weekend, I guess the 22nd of April that year, I went back, and by way of a graft, they repaired the iliac aneurysm. That wasn't so bad. I didn't spend nearly as much time in the hospital, went back home, recovered pretty much from that, and went right back to work as soon as I could, and worked all summer. The DVT was very painful. The sensation of that I had, it was like I had half a tennis ball in my shoe that was full of needles sticking into the bottom of my foot. And any time that I walked, I should have known this even before I had the dissection. My calves would cramp up. I didn't really pay any attention to it, and I certainly didn't go to the doctor. Walking was difficult at best. So the 22nd of September, another very gifted vascular surgeon performed a bypass of that popliteal aneurysm and converted a vein into an artery down my leg to give me some more circulation into my right foot. That surgery was very extensive, very traumatic. He told me it would be. And after I got out of the hospital, that required rehabilitation in another facility. Here again, some wonderful people that helped me. I continued physical and occupational therapy though, and recovered, rehabilitated myself, and my walking ability did improve. And after a few weeks, I went back to work again. Mostly I worked in the office, and my ability to work was compromised. I realized that. I did what I could. But it was very hard to concentrate on the task at hand. I was preoccupied with my condition. I had to go to the doctor a lot. I had to leave work for therapy. And one way it was a 114-mile trip every day, and it was just, it was very difficult. But I was preoccupied. I was obsessed with my condition. Yeah, I worried a lot, but I guess I was nervous that, what's next? Waiting for the other shoe to drop. They told me, a couple of folks told me that I might have suffered some PTSD. Hadn't been to war, so how could that be? I asked myself, but I had developed a phobia of any kind of needles, IV. Just going to the doctor upset me a lot. I was terrified of the shower. just something about it. And I think my mobility being compromised and loss of my physical strength, I felt very threatened by that. Got over it somewhat, and continued working, continued to improve. But I noticed during that time, I had an opportunity to observe human nature in myself and other people. People mistook what had happened to me as, oh, you had a stroke. Oh, you had a heart attack. No, I had an aneurysm. I had 2 or 3 aneurysms. But after I went back in April after the February surgery on the AAA, and I asked that surgeon, I'm a big boy, tell me, how close was that? She says, he spit you out and sent you back for some reason. I had an ample opportunity to ponder that. I don't know, I had a different perspective of people that were sick or infirm or had their mobility challenged. I actually did some work in Pensacola trying to get benches and handicap ramps improved for not myself, but for other people I watched trying to get around. I was a lot more tolerant of those people. And I always kept telling myself, I had seen people that were very ill that had been much more seriously injured than me, so I knew it could get a lot worse. If there was anything that I could do, anything now that I could do to help people, I would be eager to do that. Maybe I wasn't that way so much before, but I've also had to work on my understanding that other people have problems too. And I had to be patient and tolerant with them. But I don't have a lot of patience with people that exploit minor aches and pains. I live with pain every day, all day. I don't take any sort of pain medication now, and I'm going to try not to. That could be bad in itself. After the surgery on my leg, I tried morphine once. They convinced me that I was going to need it to be able to get up out of the bed. I tried that. That didn't turn out well either. And during the first surgery for the abdominal aneurysm, I actually hallucinated or had some really weird dreams while taking opioids. And I refused those. And they asked me, are you going to be able to do without anything? Well, I have. I took a Tylenol September 23rd of 2017, and other than my 81 milligram aspirin I take every day, that's it. I don't take anything for pain. My right foot still hurts, and it always will. And I'm still learning after almost 3 years to deal with that. But that's done one day at a time. And I realize it could have been a lot worse. I could have had a lot different outcome. And as stubborn as I was and as I am, it's a wonder it didn't. I should have gone to the doctor and found out what was causing my legs to cramp up. And I had high blood pressure. So I'm medicated for that. In that respect, I feel better now than I did back then. Not able to exercise and work outside, but I get scolded for things that I do. I take Coumadin and aspirin. And I do things like run a chainsaw and whatnot, but I'm going to try to live my life as long as I can. And so that concludes my story. If any of you would like to get in touch sometime, I would look forward to that. And if I can help anyone, please let me know. Thank you. Bye-bye.